What's up, everyone? I'm Lenny Kiser, an Ableton Certified Trainer, producer, and audio engineer. In this video, I'm going to show you how to work with the new features in Live 11. I thought it would be useful for you to see the updates in the context of making beats. So we're going to work on 2 song ideas in this video. So first, I'm going to add some vocals, and to do that, I'll use one of the new additions in Live 11 called VoiceBox. VoiceBox is an experimental toolkit that includes dynamic multi-sampled vocal instruments, audio effect racks for your own vocals, and a bunch of dope vocal samples. I'll open the Instruments folder and then select Harmonic Vocal Racks and Complex Vocal Racks. Before we write the vocal part, I just want to point out that there's a new panel next to the macros in the instrument rack, and that's another new feature in Live 11, Macro Variations. Macro variations allow you to store and recall the state of your macros. Let's launch the Rotary Tones macro variation so we can see how that sounds. And now light shift. Cool. So let's learn how to create a new macro variation. I'll click the New button. And of course, I can tweak these macros to get the effect that I want. Then I can save the variation by clicking the Overwrite button. I can also rename it for easy recall later. Another fun addition is the Randomize button. If I click Randomize, it changes all the macro control values. Now obviously, sometimes you might not want a certain value to get randomized. Well, if you right-click on one of the macros, you can exclude that macro from randomization. You can also exclude it from macro variations if you want. One last thing to mention while we're working with a rack, as of Live 11, now you can have as many as 16 macros, or as few as 1. Okay. I'll relaunch the glass automation variation and then I'll record a quick performance. I'll double click on the clip and then quantize that performance. So here's our new MIDI clip. Now let's add a little variation to this vocal part by adding another instrument from VoiceBox. I'll add the preset Digital Pop Veronica, and I'll create a new MIDI clip and make it 8 bars. Okay, and let's add some notes. And then let's duplicate that and add a 3rd note there. And let's go ahead and turn that down a little bit. All right, next I'm going to add a chord, and then we'll mangle it with some of the new audio effects in Live 11. I have the instrument ready to go. It's an Arturia Prophet preset called Brass. Now I'll go ahead and create a clip so we can add our chord. This track will be in the key of A minor, so I'll use a new feature in Live 11 called Scale Mode to set the scale of this clip. All I have to do is click here to enable scale mode. Then I'll set the root note to A and the scale name to minor. Now all of the notes in the scale are highlighted in the clip's color. We'll go into more detail about scale mode later in the demo. Okay, I'll go ahead and add an A minor chord. Nothing about this sound is very interesting at the moment, and that's why we're going to dive into the realm of sound design with some of Live 11's new audio effects. I'll select the audio effects category in the browser, and right away you'll notice that now all the devices are organized into groups. The first new effect we're going to add is called Spectral Time, which is in the delay and loop category. Spectral Time is one of 2 new spectral devices. The other is Spectral Resonator. Both of these devices use fast Fourier transform analysis, or FFT, to break down the incoming signal into its various parts, or frequencies. You can then manipulate and transform that spectral information in interesting ways. So Spectral Time is taking those frequency components and feeding them into a delay. This device has your typical delay settings like time and feedback. You can also shift the frequency of the delayed signal, but the real spectral magic happens with this bottom set of parameters. With tilt, you can increase the delay times for different frequencies, tilt to the right to delay the highs more than the lows, tilt to the left to delay the lows more than the highs. The visualizer for this device is called a sonogram, and it really helps you understand what's happening to the spectral content. The dry signal and the wet signal are different colors, so you can see the original audio and how it's being treated by the effect. Okay, let's move on to the spray control. This lets you smear the delay times across the frequencies. Mask is like a spectral filter that limits the effect of the tilt and spray settings. To the left, tilt and spray are applied to low frequencies. To the right, tilt and spray are applied to high frequencies. Now let's check out the freezer options by grabbing one of the Spectral Time presets called Freezer Fading. So in this preset, the delay is off, but the freeze function is active. If I turn the device off, we can hear that the original chord is pretty lame. But now with Spectral Time, it sounds ethereal and futuristic. Next, I'm going to lengthen these notes to change the sound a little bit more. We're going to be working with this sound for a bit, so I'm going to map a button on my MIDI controller to turn the freeze on and off. Next, we're going to add some movement to this sound with the updated chorus effect. So in Live 11, this device has been renamed to Chorus-Ensemble, and it has expanded capabilities and new modes. When this device is in classic mode, you're getting the same chorus as the one in Live 10. But the ensemble and vibrato modes are new. Ensemble mode adds a third delayed signal, which can give you a smoother sound than a classic chorus. I'm just going to increase the dry-wet here and the LFO rate so we can hear the effect a little bit better. And finally, we have vibrato mode, which applies stronger modulation to produce pitch variation. And that's how we're going to create some movement in this sound. I'll set the LFO to a slow rate and bring the amount down. Now we have a nice subtle lo-fi pitch warble, but the sound is still a little static and sustained. So let's create more movement with one of my favorite devices, the auto filter. I'll set it to a high-pass filter and add some resonance. And then I'll set a really slow LFO for some subtle movement. Next, we're going to use Reverb as a sound design tool to create a pitch-shifted shimmery effect. To do that, we'll add Hybrid Reverb. Hybrid Reverb is a new device in Live 11, and it combines both algorithmic and convolution reverb into a single effect. On the left side is the convolution reverb, which is similar to the Max for Live convolution reverb device. And on the right side is the algorithmic section. So you're getting a mashup of the two reverbs, and this blend control lets you mix between the two. By default, the input hits the convolution first, and then it gets routed into the algorithmic reverb. But you can use this setting to change the routing configuration. There's also a built-in EQ that can help you shape the sound. Here's what's cool about the algorithmic reverb. Basically, you're getting 5 different reverb devices in one because you can choose one of these algorithm types, and that alters the character of the reverb. Notice when I select the shimmer algorithm, some of the knobs change, and we now have pitch and shimmer controls. That sounds good, so next I'll turn on vintage mode and select old to get a lo-fi effect, similar to what you would hear with a classic hardware reverb. While we're over here, I'll just point out that this device has a bass mono switch if you want to center the low end of the reverb tail. I want to hear more of the shimmer, so I'm going to change the blend to 80% algorithmic. All right, let's do some more sound design. I found that it sounds pretty cool when I adjust the size parameter while the chord is playing. So I'm going to resample that audio to a new track to capture this idea. I'll create a new audio track and set the input to resampling. And then I'll record enable that track. And now I'll record while I play with the size control. I like how it's mangling the shimmery chord and creating a unique texture. I actually like the version I made when I was creating this project, so I'm going to delete this clip and drag in the one from my library. So here's what this sounds like in the context so far. I hope that gives you some ideas for how you can use the new audio effects in Live 11 for sound design. Before we move on to the drums, I'm going to add some cassette deck hiss to this loop for a little lo-fi authenticity. This sample came from the Lo-Fi Hip Hop Pack, which is really dope if you want to check it out on the Ableton website. Okay, let's add some drums. I already created a custom drum rack that we can use for the beat. So I'll go ahead and create a new clip and make that 2 bars. Then I'm going to add some snares and a couple of kicks. And I'm going to change the velocity of all those to be full velocity. Then I'll use a second kick for accents, and kick 2 is basically just a copy of the first kick with a shorter decay. Now I'll duplicate that to 4 bars, and I'm going to add a variation at the end here with an extra snare and remove one of the kicks. I'll duplicate that again, add another variation with the snare, delete these kicks, and finally I'll add a snare fill at the end of the loop. Cool, that's a good start. Let's layer it with some more drum sounds. I'm going to load the Kuma kit, which is also from the Lo-Fi Hip Hop Pack. So I'll add a clip and set it to 2 bars. I'll layer in a kick and a snare, and then add some hi-hats. Let's give that a listen. It's a little loud, so I'll turn down the track volume. Next, I want to add another layer of percussion to the loop. Rather than using typical drum sounds, let's load one of the vocal percussion instruments from VoiceBox. I'll use the Rhythmic Voice Effects instrument. Okay, and I'll go ahead and double click to create a 1-bar clip so we can add some notes to trigger these vocal samples. Let's hear how that sounds. Why don't we check out one of these macro variations? I'll launch the one called Not So Precise. Nice. I like how that makes the decay of the vocal samples longer and more interesting. And this is a good start, but it sounds a little bit too hi-fi and thin. Let's add some grit with the Spectral Resonator device. I'm going to use one of the presets called Lowrider Drums. You can hear how it's resonating the signal at a lower pitch and giving it a slightly metallic sound. Alright, we already talked about how the new Spectral devices in Live 11 break up the incoming signal into a bunch of individual frequency components or partials. With the Spectral Time device, we were delaying and freezing those partials. And with the Spectral Resonator, we resonate those partials at a specific frequency, which can stretch, shift, and blur the audio. It can color and texturize sounds, and it's really good at adding harmonics or taking them away. So let's take a quick look at the Spectral Resonator. In this main section, the frequency control lets you tune the resonance to a particular pitch. Right now it's set to a MIDI note value, but you can select a frequency instead. Then you use the decay control to extend or shorten the resonance. If you want to shape the tone, you can adjust the damp settings. Stretch allows you to stretch or compress the spacing of the partials. And shift pitches the resonance up or down. And here you have some modulation options for adding movement. Note that we're using this device in internal mode, which means that the frequency knob determines the pitch. But you can also use this device in MIDI mode. In that case, external MIDI notes from another track will determine the pitch. That opens up a lot of possibilities to play this device as a polyphonic instrument, similar to a vocoder. Now that I've thoroughly messed up the settings of this preset, I'm going to reload Lowrider Drums on this track. So this new percussion part has a lot of interesting sounds, but right now it's a little busy and it's kind of messing up the groove. I want to mute some of the parts to simplify the pattern. To save time, I already chopped and edited the audio, so I'll just pull that clip in from the browser. Okay, to finish up this song idea, we need some bass. I already picked out a Reactor synth to use for the bass, so I'll go ahead and load that. I'll create a 4-bar clip and write a simple bass line. And then I'll duplicate that. All right, let's hear what we have. All right, so now we have the basic elements of this beat. Next, I'm going to do a quick arrangement to flesh out this idea and show you how I'd approach finishing this track. If you'd rather jump to the next Live 11 new feature, then skip ahead using the chapters on the progress bar or the time code you see on the screen. Okay, let's move on to arranging. To get started, I'll create a few scenes here in the session view. The first scene will just have the first vocal part and the cassette hiss. Then the next scene will also be part of the intro, so we'll bring in the second vocal part and the mangled chord. I'm also going to pull in a hi-hat loop to build the momentum a little bit. And the third scene will become the drop section, so I'll add the other elements, but I'll leave out the chords and the hiss. Now we're ready to bring these scenes over to the arrangement. All I have to do is drag and drop them. Let's start with this first scene. And I'll trim this to be 4 bars long. Now I'll bring over scene 2, which will be 8 bars. And finally, the drop section. And I'll make this 8 bars for now. Okay, at this point we have a rough arrangement, so now we can start making edits. To flesh out the arrangement, I usually like to add transitions, fills, and ornaments, test out additional instruments, and generally create more variation and interest. Alright, so let's start with the edits to the intro. First, we're going to create a fill here right at the end of bar 4 using a tom drum and some noise. So I'll drag the tom in and we'll copy this over twice. Next, I'll double click and transpose this 12 semitones up. The next tom hit, 7 semitones up, and the last one we'll keep at 0. Here's what that sounds like now. Cool, and that's a little bit loud, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it down. And then let's add some noise on top of it to give it a little bit of texture. And I'll just pick a part randomly out of here, edit it, move it under the toms, and also turn this down. Next, we'll work on the transition into the drop. So we'll go over here to bar 9, and we're going to add a riser. We've got a preset ready in the browser called Boinky Saw Riser. And I'll go ahead and add a MIDI clip and add a note down here on A1 and hit the legato button. And then I'll add some filter automation. All right, let's give that a listen. Okay, so it's a little bit loud, so I'll go ahead and turn that down. All right, so let's use a sound effect next to fill in some of the gap here before the transition. So I'll go over to my sound effect folder, and we're gonna grab this one and drag it onto the timeline. And let's pitch it down so it sounds a little more tough. Cool, and then let's trim off the end. I think the riser is really doing a good job building the tension before the drop, but I think we could use one more musical element to make the transition more unique. So I've got a preset ready with the hybrid keys. Let's hear how that sounds. Cool. So I'll record that in. And I'll adjust the timing a little bit here. Let's hear how the whole transition sounds now. Cool, let's tackle the drop section next. So to start, let's take our 8-bar part and duplicate it again. Then we're going to remove the hi-hats for the first 4 bars. And for the hats in the drop section here, we are going to speed them up. And then I'll just loop that out for the rest of this section. At this point, we've heard the vocal for 12 bars, and we need to do some minor variations. So I'll consolidate the clip, go in, and just add a couple notes. And then I'm going to adjust the velocities on those and duplicate. Okay, let's hear the changes. Okay, and I'll just color that clip slightly different and duplicate it. Okay, let's make some more edits to the drop. With loop-based music, it's really easy for beats to get monotonous and stale. One way to prevent that from happening is to interrupt the loop at certain points. So I like to drop out some elements and fill the space with interesting sound effects, textures, and fills. Okay, so let's start with some of these edits. So I'm going to zoom in here at the end of bar 14, and we're just going to cut out the drums and the bass. Now we're going to reuse our tom fill from before. Just copy that over. And now we're going to layer a different sound effect on the last tom here. And for that, I'll use this textured simplex and drag that onto the timeline and transpose it down 7 semitones and turn the volume down. Here's how the sound effect sounds on its own and with the tom and everything together. And in case you're wondering, a lot of these cool textures and sound effects are from an Ableton pack called Flat Pack Texture Beats. All right, so let's move on to the next edit before bar 17 here. So again, I'm going to delete the drums and bass. And this time we're going to add the noise that we used from the beginning. And then we're going to add a new Monster 808. And for the 808, I'm going to turn the track down, go into the clip, change the warp mode to complex, transpose it up 14 semitones, and then go into the envelopes tab and write in some transposition modulation. And let's hear how it sounds. So another way that I like to create variation and keep the interest in the track is to add drum fills and switch up the pattern. So we'll go over here to bar 20 on our drum track, and I'm going to separate that, double click on the clip, remove some kicks, add some new ones, and then let's add a couple extra snares to this, and let's hear how that sounds. Nice, and so let's add a little bit of variation here on the end and pitch this last snare down. So I'll go to the snare and right click on the transpose control to show the automation. And we'll zoom in and use the draw mode, hitting B to bring this down 20 semitones and make sure that extends to the end of the bar. Okay, so let's hear how that sounds. Nice. So let's keep this going. Let's add something else underneath those kicks that were added at bar 20. So I'm going to use a piece of this weird loop to layer underneath the kick drums. So I'll drag that in. Don't want to use the rest of this here, so I'll just trim that and then duplicate it, and I'll turn it down. Cool, so let's add one more sound effect here. And drag that in. And again, we're going to trim this so they're kind of taking turns. And then again, I feel like we could use a more musical element. So we're going to do that same sort of chord strum, but this time we're going to use a different instrument. And I have a DX7 here ready to go in the project. So I'll close that and we'll use the same MIDI from before and I'll add that in there. And while we're at it, let's turn down the texture. All right, let's hear how all that sounds together. Nice, so the chord seems to cut off quite early. So let's add some reverb automation to smooth the transition. Cool, and let's hear how that sounds. All right, so let's move on to the second half of the drop. And to keep things interesting and the momentum and the dynamic going up, let's add a couple new instruments. So first, I'm going to layer the bass in this section. So I'll drag in this respace and I'll copy the bass clip down onto it, double click, and we need to shift this up 2 octaves. And here's what they sound like together. Next, I'm going to add a rhythmic synth element to keep the energy up and also just to give it a cool sonic texture. So I'll grab this ARP 2600 preset and I'll create a clip and enter in a note at A3 and hit legato. Let's hear how that sounds. Okay, so let's add some more fills to this section. So I'll go to the drums and add one here right before bar 23. And I'll set the grid to 1/8 notes and add 2 snares. And then again, we'll pitch this one down. Let's hear how that sounds. And so let's add one more variation in the drums out here. So I'll separate the clip, double click in, again, add a couple notes, and then adjust the velocities. And let's hear how that sounds. So I think we're good for the drop. Next, we'll create a transition into a breakdown section. So to do that, I'm going to trim the synth back to bar 28. Then let's bring in one more sound effect. So I'm going to use swing 111. And it's a pretty funny sound. So let's drop that in there. But obviously that's not going to work as it stands. So I'll double click on it and let's do something crazy like transpose it down 48 semitones. Now we have this, which is also pretty funny, but let's separate it there and then just bring it back so we kind of have this falling sound into our next section. All right, so let's create the breakdown. So for the breakdown, I'm going to copy the chords over. I also have this horn loop. So I'll drag that in. We'll copy the bass over, but let's change it up. So I'll join this. Let's delete these notes. Let's create a longer bass line so it's nice and slow to match with the horns. And let's do something slightly different. And I'll duplicate that. And then to smooth the transition over, I'll drag the hi-hats out and separate them, join it, and so let's do some transposition automation on them. So I'll add a breakpoint, edit the value here, and take it down to octaves. And now let's hear what this sounds like. So after the breakdown, we're going to create a second drop, and we need a transition into that. So let's do a run on the DX7. So I'll hit record, and let's do it. Cool. So I'm going to just adjust the timing a little bit here by sliding the clip, and let's hear how that sounds. So for our second drop, I'll copy over this section from the first drop. We'll do some cleanup here, delete that clip and this one. And then let's drop out the respace and the ARP to make it different. And then let's switch up the vocal pattern and let's make it super simple. And then for Vox 2, we're going to add a completely different pattern. And to save time, I'm going to use the one that I pre-made here. And let's hear how this sounds now all together. All right, so let's do a couple more edits and then we'll be done. So to start, I'll cut everything here right before bar 39. Okay, and let's add in this textured sparrow noise. And I'm gonna extend these MIDI clips so we get that extra snare hit. And let's bring over this other noise. And our 808. And let's zoom in. And I'll trim these two clips. And here's what we have so far. And for this next edit, let's create some contrast by just cutting these, and we're not going to add anything else. Subtract the hi-hats too. Cool, and to finish it out, we'll just grab these sound effects from here as our last transition. Nice. Let's check out what we have so far in our arrangement. so I like how this is turning out. I'm not going to arrange a whole song here, but hopefully you get the idea of how I approach finishing a track. Let's dive into some more Live 11 new features. To do that, I'll start a new project. Okay, here we are in another session, and I've already programmed some drums. Right now, the beat feels a little bit rigid and robotic, so let's spice it up with some of the new updates to MIDI clips in Live 11. So first, you'll notice the new velocity editor here. It's a lot more visual, and it's also much easier to work with note velocities. So let's do something about these hi-hats. I want to create a more dynamic performance, so I'll randomize the velocities. You'll notice there's a new randomize button here on the Notes tab. If I select the hi-hat notes and click randomize, Live will automatically apply random velocity changes. The reason we're getting such large variations in velocity values is because this randomized window is set to 127. For these hi-hats, we want less drastic variation, so I'll go ahead and undo that. If I set the window to a smaller number and then click randomize, it limits the distance from the starting value. So when you want subtle randomization, set a small window. In addition to being able to randomize the velocities, now you can also add the element of chance. This velocity range slider defines the range of probability. If I set a positive value, then there's a chance we'll get louder notes. If I set a negative value, then we might get quieter notes. I'll set this to -30 to humanize the hi-hats just a little bit. So that was velocity probability, but we can also set probability for whether or not a note will play. To do that, we use the probability editor, and we can open it up using this button. Right now, all the notes are at 100%, so they play every time. If I reduce the probability, then there's a 50% chance the note will play. Okay, let's add some variation to this pattern by changing the probability of only some of these hi-hats. So you'll also notice that if you set probability for a note, there's this little triangle in the top left corner of the MIDI note. Cool, and that just gives us another layer of variation. Another way we can humanize this beat is to apply a groove. As of Live 11, grooves are now available as a category in the browser. So I'll pick one of the grooves and drag it onto the clip to apply it. And I'll go ahead and close the groove pool. All right, these drums are sounding a little bit too clean, so let's add some lo-fi character with the newly redesigned Redux. So go to Audio Effects and the Drive and Color group and open up Redux, and we're going to use the preset Vintage Sampler. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the updates to the Redux device. To me, the most useful addition is the dry-wet control, so now you can just mix in part of the effect. And there are also more sound sculpting tools in the new version. For the sample rate, we have jitter for adding more noise. We also have a pre and post filter. And for bit depth, there's a shape control for adjusting the fidelity when you reduce the bit depth, and the DC shift changes the quantization distortion. Okay, I'll go ahead and lower this to about 40% so it's only partially affecting the signal. All right, now that we're done with the drum groove, we can move on to the melody. I'm going to use an instrument from the Drive and Glow pack from Ableton. It is called the pipe delay. So I'm going to add a clip and first set it to a half a bar. And we're going to be using the scale modes again. And in this time, we're going to set the scale to B flat and minor. We'll close the velocity and probability windows. And now let's go into a little more detail about scale mode. So currently you'll see that the piano roll is still showing sharps. So if you right click, you can change the root note so that it's showing flats. And there's a new quick key K to show or hide the scale notes. And you can also use the fold to scale button up here to show just the notes within the scale. Cool, so let's go ahead and experiment with adding in a melody. So here's a couple techniques you can try out when you're using the scale modes. So one is just to simply create a shape. So we might create a shape that looks like this, and then we can simply just move it around. And let's hear how that sounds. Nice. Another technique that you can try out is to just create arpeggios. And I'll duplicate that. And then to get a more varied arpeggiation, we can just start changing some of the notes. And let's hear how that sounds. Before we move on, I just want to point out that now that I've set the scale, all new MIDI clips will default to that scale. And that's also reflected on push. All right, so I just wanted to show you a couple examples of what you could do with the scale mode there. I'm going to go ahead and delete these clips and just go back to the original melody. Okay, let's add a little movement to our sound with the updated Phaser and Flanger device. So we'll go to Audio Effects and Pitch and Modulation and Phaser and Flanger. As you can see, Phaser and Flanger have been combined into one device here, so now you just access the Phaser, the Flanger, and the newly added doubler. And there's been a bunch of improvements, so let's take a look. If you recall, in the previous version of the Phaser, you could only have 8 poles, but with the new version, you can define up to 42 notches for a more intense Phaser sound. And we also have a new visualization here, which makes it a lot easier to see what's going on in the device. And it's showing you the center frequency and the number of notches around it. There's also a spread control, which will either bring the notches closer or further apart. And at the bottom here, we have our LFO, which is modulating the center frequency. And if you want a more intense effect, you can turn the feedback up. There's also a blend control, and when we turn this up, the LFO will also modulate the spread. Next, let's talk about the flanger. The flanger creates a delayed copy of the signal and then modulates the delay time. So you notice the delay time here, and I'll go ahead and play it and move this around. You can also add feedback to get more extreme comb filtering. And the bottom section includes the modulation options for the delay time. Okay, and you'll notice that the maximum time that the flanger can go to is about 20 milliseconds. So when we click on the doubler, we notice that the doubler time starts at about 20 milliseconds. The doubler essentially works just like the flanger, but the difference is that the delay times are longer. When delay times are longer than 20 milliseconds, we start to hear an audible delay, which creates this doubling effect. And the last thing I want to point out is this warmth control, and it adds some slight distortion and filtering. It's a nice addition to the Phaser-Flanger device. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use a preset called Doubler Mirror for this sound. So let's hear how that sounds in the context. Okay, while we're in session view, let's take a look at the improvements to follow actions. We're going to use follow actions to create some variations in this melody. So the first thing I'm going to do is just duplicate this clip and then copy it down once more. And then I'll go in and shift this one up 1 octave and take this one down 1 octave. So I'm going to use follow actions here to jump between these 3 different clips to get some variation in the melody. So let's set up the follow action for the first clip. So I'll double click on it, and we'll notice now that when you click this button, we'll be able to see the follow actions, and we can turn them on with this button here. And you use this drop down to choose which action to take after the clip plays. So I'm going to leave it on next, and we're going to set it to 60%. So 60% of the time, it's going to jump to the next clip. 40% of the time, it will take no action. And you may have also noticed that now it is a slider instead of a fraction. And let's go ahead and jump to our next clip and set up a follow action. So we'll turn follow action on. And now we're going to use a follow action that's new to Live 11, which is jump. So I can select jump, and then I can choose to jump to clip 4 in the target box here. And now let's jump to our last clip, and we'll create a follow action. And again, we'll jump, and this time we're going to jump back to the first clip. Cool. And now this will jump back to the first clip 78% of the time. And let's hear how it sounds. Cool. While we're here, I want to point out a few other improvements to follow actions. There's now a follow action multiplier setting, and it lets you set the number of loops that will play before the follow action is triggered. And last but not least, in Live 11, you can now configure follow actions for scenes. If you select one of the scenes, you'll see this brand new view called Scene View, where you can enable any of the follow actions that are available for clips. All of these improvements combined really give you more flexibility when you're setting up your project for live performance or when you need creative inspiration during your jam sessions. All right, next I'm going to add a chord sample to the loop, and then we'll do some sound design with a new Max for Live device in Live 11 called Pitch Loop 89. So first I'll drag the sample into the session, and I'll launch the clip so we can hear how it sounds. And I'm going to go into the clip and just turn it up 6 dB. That's a good starting point, but let's make it more interesting with some pitch shifted delays. So I'll go ahead and load on Pitch Loop 89. So I'll go into my packs, Pitch Loop 89. So this device is inspired by the DHM-89B2, which was an early digital effects processor. This effect is good for creating pitch shifting delays, glitchy sounds, and washed out textures. You can think of each of these delay lines as tape heads, and they can be linked or operate independently. Let's take a look at some of the basic settings. The 2 most important parameters are position and segment. The position control is equivalent to delay time, and the segment defines the length of the slice. You can randomize the position using the random parameter, or you can simply use the built-in LFO. If you want pitch shifting delays, then you can adjust the coarse and fine tuning. And you can activate the vibrato to modulate the pitch. There are basic filters in the device. And you can also add feedback. It's also possible to freeze the delay lines to create an infinitely looping signal. Finally, let's talk about the bandwidth control, which defines the recording and playback sample rate. You could choose between 20, 10, and 5K. As you can see, it creates interesting octave jumps, and it can also lead to unique sonic artifacts due to the low sample rate. So lots of sonic possibilities with this new device. Now that we've explored some of the parameters, I'm going to add one of the presets to this track. It's called Spaced Out. We're getting a lot of movement due to the LFO, random parameter, and the vibrato. I'm going to pitch shift the delay up 1 octave. Next, I'll decrease the feedback amount and also the wet dry. And finally, I'll shape the sound a little bit with the filter. Cool. That adds a nice shimmery effect to our chord sound, so let's hear it in context. Next, we'll write the bass line. Okay, so I'll go ahead and grab a bass preset that I've prepared, Repro Bass. And I'll double click to create a clip. We'll make it 4 bars, and we'll write in our notes. And let's hear how that sounds. And I'd also like to point out that the CPU meters are new in Live 11, and you can also see a CPU meter for each track. And that makes it easy to see which instruments or effects are taxing your CPU the most. Next, I'm going to add some filter movement to the bass with one of the Max for Live modulation devices. As of Live 11, all 3 of the modulation devices are now located in the audio effects category in the Modulators group. So there we have LFO, envelope follower, and shaper. And I'll go ahead and click Map and assign this to the cutoff. And I'm going to decrease the depth so it doesn't create so much movement, and also move the offset so it stays more to the left side of the filter, and we'll unsync the rate just so it's giving it a little bit of drift. I'm also going to turn the bass down just a little bit more. Let's hear how it sounds. Okay, now that we're done with the bass line, I want to add a second chord layer to create more texture and harmonic movement. And I'll use MPE, which is a new feature in Live 11, to make it more expressive with modulation. I need to choose a device that has MPE support, so I'll load a wavetable preset. As of Live 11 beta release, the other devices with MPE support are Sampler and Arpeggiator. So I'll create a clip and add the MIDI notes for our chord. And I'll stagger the notes to create the harmonic movement. And I'll go ahead and turn that down and then play it. Alright, so now let's talk about MPE. MPE stands for MIDI Polyphonic Expression. Polyphonic expression means that you can add bends, slides, and pressure for each individual note in a chord, and even morph between chords to create evolving sonic textures. There are a lot of MPE controllers on the market, such as Roly and Sensel. Not only does Live 11 support those controllers, but you can even adjust how the controllers interact with the software. All you have to do is add the new MPE control device to the track. You can edit the pitch, slide, and pressure to get the right feel for your controller. But the good news is that even if you don't have an MPE controller, you can still use polyphonic expression in Live 11 to do per-note automation. Okay, to work with MPE data, we need to use the brand new Expression tab that's available in Clip View. I can either click the tab to activate it or use the shortcut Alt or Option 3. And of course, Alt or Option 1 and 2 activate the other two tabs in the Clip View. So first, I need to unfold the scale. To do per-note automation, we just need to select one of the notes. So I'll highlight the top note in this chord. Now I can edit the pitch, slide, or pressure envelopes for that note. Let's start with pitch. So I want to pitch bend this top note down to the next note. Just like any other envelope, all I have to do is add breakpoints and move them around. Cool, so now we have pitch bend automation on just a single note in this chord. Okay, let's move on to slide and pressure. If you don't have an MPE controller, then you can just think of these as per-note modulation sources. So for example, I could go to the matrix in the wavetable device and map the slide position to oscillator 1. Now I'll go back to the Expression tab, and I can modulate the slide envelope for one of the notes in the chord. I'll pick the D flat note and add a ramp up, then ramp down. And let's hear it in the context with everything else. Cool, so I hope that gives you some ideas for using MPE in Live 11. Even if you don't have an MPE controller, per-note automation opens up a ton of sonic possibilities. Alright, the next feature we're going to cover is comping, which is a long-awaited addition to Ableton Live. But first, I need to move this loop over to the arrangement. To save some time, since this video is pretty long, I'll fast forward to the arrangement with some of the elements already in place. So here we have a short intro going into the drop section. I froze and flattened the melody, sprinkled in some sound effects, and I added 2 tops loops for more energy. Okay, let's talk about comping. Comping is an incredibly useful tool in recording and music production. Basically, it lets you organize multiple passes of a performance into individual takes. Then you can stitch together parts of those takes to get the best result. Obviously, this is a great feature for musicians and vocalists, but comping can also be a fun sound design tool, and that's how I'm going to use it in this demo. So let's add one final element to this song idea. I have a Korg Minilog connected to my audio interface, and I'm going to record multiple passes of audio while I tweak the knobs. My goal is to experiment and explore rather than focus on getting the perfect take. Okay, let's make some noise. I added a track to record the synth's audio, and I have another track to send MIDI to the synth. So the Korg will play these MIDI notes, and I'll record the audio. Okay, to start comping, all I have to do is turn on the arrangement loop and hit record. Cool, I think we got some decent stuff there. Now I'll show you how to edit the takes together. As you can see now, each take is in its own take lane. There are a couple different ways to comp the takes together. First, you can highlight a section and hit Return or Enter. And you can also use Draw Mode to draw it in. Just one final note before we move on, you can use comping to record both audio and MIDI performances. You can even drag audio from the browser into a take lane for even more sound design craziness. Cool, we're done with comping, so I'll hide the take lanes to get them out of the way. Okay, the last feature that I'm going to show you is linked track editing. In Live 11, you can link multiple tracks together and edit them simultaneously. So to do this, we just need to select the tracks that we want to link together, and then right-click and select Link Tracks. You could see now there's an icon showing these tracks are linked. So now I can grab one of these tracks and trim all of them. Or we can select one and it highlights all of them and we can easily delete. And we can also do other editing functions such as reverse. And you can even warp too. Okay, so I'll go ahead and play this from back here. Cool, so that's a handy feature that can speed up your workflow. So those are the new features in Live 11. I hope that gives you an idea of how you can use them in your projects. There are 3 new features I didn't cover in this demo, so I'll go over them really quickly. The first honorable mention goes to live tempo following. You'll notice there's now a follow button on the control bar. If you enable it, then Live listens to and adjusts its tempo based on the incoming audio. The next feature is templates. There's now a category in the browser with some pre-made templates, and you can also save your own custom templates there. And the last honorable mention is multi-clip editing. That feature came out in Live 10, but it's been significantly improved in Live 11. And finally, just a heads up that there are some new additions to Live 11 that still haven't been released in the beta yet. There's some new core library content and new specialty instruments like string quartet and upright piano. Okay, that's it. If you'd like to learn more about Ableton Live and making beats, check out our website, sequence1.org.